Putting on conferences is so much work. So thank you everybody for being here. And if you haven't guessed by how I'm dressed, I'm the Bitcoin politics guy. My name is Dennis Porter. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Satoshi Action Fund, which is a nonprofit that essentially goes around the country and educates lawmakers and regulators on the benefits of Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining and what it can do for our country and our jurisdictions and for the individual people within the states and the whole country as a whole. So we started in June of 2022 with a distinct mission. We wanted to go on offense for Bitcoin. We saw in 2022 that there was a hostile administration that wanted to do nearly anything possible to limit the expansion and the growth of Bitcoin in this country. So instead of wasting our time and our resources, we wanted to be efficient, just like many of the super efficient Bitcoin miners that we see today, and spend our time and energy where we thought we could have the highest possible ROI for Bitcoin. And that was to go to the States. For those that aren't familiar with the US political system and why going to the States is an effective measure, you don't need to look back any further in history than, let's say, the cannabis movement. But also there are other movements that have been very successful at starting at the state level and advocating for their cause, including a woman's right to vote, the civil rights movement. All of these things started at the state level. Funny enough, actually, women's right to vote, a lot, just like very much like a digital asset and Bitcoin policy, started in the state of Wyoming. So we worked really hard. We continued to educate, and we were able to get 7 of our model policies introduced into law. For those that aren't familiar with that sort of like premise, is like oftentimes lawmakers are very busy, and they might not understand a new issue like Bitcoin. They might not understand how to craft smart policies that will enable their state to be a leader on the technology, especially in smaller states where they might have one staffer if they're lucky. Sometimes they have none. It's just them having to do all the research on all the issues that their entire state cares about or in their entire jurisdiction cares about. So that leaves this huge gap between where, oh, maybe they like Bitcoin, they want to learn more about it, but how do they go from that to educating themselves about it and then researching and figuring out what kind of policies they want to put in place? Well, that's where groups like Satoshi Action come into the conversation. And our goal is essentially to say, hey, we're going to make you love Bitcoin as much as we do. But then right after that, we are going to offer you model policy solutions that you can introduce at the state level, and then you can hopefully pass into law. So in our first year, we were able to pass 2 bills into law to protect the right to self-custody, to protect the right to run a node, and to protect the right to mine. And then we went on to the next legislative cycle, and we repeated that process. All in all, now we have introduced, over 25 states have introduced our model policies, and 6 of those model policies have passed into law, protecting the rights, the digital rights as we call them, of over 20 million Americans today. But that's not the thing that probably most of you that know about our work are really excited to hear about, right? Even though that's like we feel that's a big deal, right? Like going out and protecting the digital rights of 20 million Americans. Most of the people when I was in the lobby yesterday were like, what's this first state that's going to pass strategic Bitcoin reserve, right? Like, how many of you are familiar with the strategic Bitcoin reserve movement in this room? Okay. So what was it, about almost a year ago now, the Bitcoin conference was being put on, and I put out a little tweet that caught a lot of attention saying that Trump was about to announce a strategic Bitcoin reserve at the conference. Got a lot of calls asking me how I knew that, but ultimately it ended up to be true. And from there, we've seen not only the federal government enact a strategic Bitcoin reserve to be able to keep all the Bitcoin that they currently have on the balance sheet, we've also seen over 25 states introduce strategic Bitcoin reserve policy, which is very different from the executive order that Trump put out, right? Like we wanted to beat the federal government, but it's kind of hard to do that when all they have to do is like sign a piece of paper. The policy process is entirely different. Trying to get a strategic Bitcoin reserve bill passed into law is a very, very, very time-consuming process filled with landmines. In fact, there was a number of states that we identified where we said, okay, these are the ones, these are the guys, they're going to do it first. And Utah was like number 1, absolute number 1, like by far and away. The reason why is we had spent a year there working with those lawmakers. We had passed our model policy through their task force, which is like an off-season. As a quick note, state lawmakers, they are part-time oftentimes in most states, so they don't meet year-round. You'll be surprised that some of them also only meet every other year. And even in those states where they meet every other year, sometimes it's only like 30 or 45 days that they meet. So it's like, boom, it's fast. And in Utah, they do have an annual session, but it's about 45 days long. So we did all this prep work in the off season, meeting with lawmakers, and they meet in these task forces to be able to get them to interested in this policy. We met with the treasurer, we met with lawmakers across the state. But all it can take is one lawmaker who is powerful enough, or one official in the state, to be like, you know what, I'm not so sure about this thing. So unfortunately, that is what happened in the state of Utah. We came literally like this close to passing it there. But the exciting thing about where we are today is that we have 50 states, right? 50 bites at the apple. It's also why we like working at the state level. Even in my home state of Oregon, if I just worked in my home state of Oregon, like I've tried to do bill efforts there and they've stumbled. So that's why we like this idea of broadening out our policy effort to get as many chances as possible. Now, people are saying like, oh my gosh, all these bills are failing. Yeah, there's like 25 states. Sure, that's a great sign. 25 lawmakers in 25 states. In fact, the number's a little higher than that because some states have multiple lawmakers introducing the bill. You're going to see a lot of these bills stumble and fall. We had the exact same thing happen with digital rights. Last year, I believe we did about 20 introductions and we only passed 2 into law. So I come up here to tell you that it's important to keep in mind when you're thinking about this process that it is very common for lots of states to do introductions and only a couple to pass. But it's critical that at least one of them or 2 of them pass this into law. Because then once you get into law somewhere, it's a lot easier to get it into law elsewhere. And so as an update for where we are on that process, we certainly view there are a number of states, about 4 or 5 states right now, that are still very well positioned to be able to pass groundbreaking strategic Bitcoin reserve policy into law. And of course, we're in one of them right now here in the great state of Texas. But for your awareness, there are others. Of course, Texas has already passed it out of the Senate. The House is moving quickly to try to do it themselves. And the great thing is we actually also saw some Democrats do this as well in the state of Texas. We saw some Democrats do it in Massachusetts also. So exciting times for both sides of the aisle. So Texas is certainly one of them. Arizona is leading the charge as well. They're about to be the first probably to pass it in both chambers. The only struggle there is that the governor is not quite as aligned with the folks that are working on this policy. So if you are in Arizona, you have friends in Arizona, when the time comes, we'll certainly be leaning on you to send letters to the governor. Oklahoma is another one, a great state to be working on this policy. They've already passed it out of the House, and we expect that that policy will continue to move forward. Ohio, in fact, is also a great one. That one hasn't quite gotten started yet. Ohio is one of the few states that meets year-round. But we have a lawmaker there who has been very adamant about getting this across the finish line. He's actually the 3rd in power in the state for Republicans. He's the majority whip in the state, who is already championing the digital rights bill there, and will hopefully be able to get strategic Bitcoin rights moving here very, very shortly. We also have North Carolina. North Carolina is an interesting state because unlike most of the other states, they have the Speaker of the House as the bill sponsor. And if you are wondering why that makes a difference, it makes a huge difference because he can essentially guide it across the finish line as the one who's actually managing the process there in the House. And it's literally the only bill that he's working on. So great job by Dan Spoler out there as well, who's been on the ground, if anybody's familiar with him, doing amazing work to make sure that gets across the finish line. Another exciting one is Michigan. Michigan has the majority leader working on this policy. And he actually just came to Mining Disrupt to speak on this issue. And we plan to get a lot more of these lawmakers out to speak to be able to show that there is the political support necessary to get this across the finish line. So all in all, we've got Oklahoma, Arizona, Texas, Ohio, Michigan, and North Carolina. And if you're in one of those states, I would highly encourage you to reach out to your lawmakers. Like, this stuff isn't easy. When we're working with these lawmakers, we're not just putting the bill up on the website and saying, hey, go introduce this bill. We are educating them on the importance of it, getting them to make the introduction, showing up for the testimony for the hearing, driving advocacy campaigns, repeating that entire process on the other side of the chamber because you have the House and you have the Senate, and then, of course, advocating for the governor to sign it into law. And the thing that makes a big difference in closing here is when you show up. That is the big thing for these lawmakers. When they get letters or when they get donations from Bitcoiners, when they get engagement from this community, that makes all the difference in the world for them when they're trying to make a decision about whether they're trying to decide to pass something like this into law. And keep in mind, this is very cutting edge policy. When we talk to lawmakers, some of them are like, you're literally insane. This is the craziest thing I've ever heard of. So keep that in mind, but don't be afraid to continue pushing. And eventually we will get strategic Bitcoin reserve, not only as an executive order, but passed into law at the state and hopefully the federal level. Thank you.